Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Native Language Panel Series 1, Preserving Our Roots, the Urgency of Native Languages. Before we get started, I would like to call upon Wyman Kirk to say a prayer and blessing to start us off in a good way today. Wyman?
Yes, Nagad. Come, the lista. Let's pray. Iskion eflanahi, Nagada. Ijaya the dolis tanehi, extelti. Iskion eflanahi, Nagada. Wojedo ha, Ijaya lihelis tanati. Iskion eflanahi. Woji lunki, Ijan tayosti, Jakto histi, Ijan yaliheli cheno, Nagad, ni de jadane la, ni de hadane ha, ni de hadane hestino, Ijan stawaduga, Ijan yatadasta, Ijan yohi yuhesti, Ogi woni histi, Oji woni ha, Iskiyaktiya, Jogilonstanti, Iskiyaktiya, Duyukta, Yogadanti, Ogadante ti, Iskiyati nuga, Nagada, Nusta, Ijantayohi ha, Iskiyaneflanahi, Ijangayuha, Ijanyalieli chenhon. Wadon.
Wado. Thank you, Wyman. Thank you so very much. Appreciate that. Today's webinar is presented by the Office of Indian Economic Development and is in collaboration with the Bureau of Indian Education. We would like to thank the Bureau of Indian Education for their contributions for today's webinar. We have some housekeeping items to cover. The webinar will be recorded and everyone will stay muted during the presentations. There will be question and answer later in the webinar, but at any time you can put questions in the chat. Once we reach the Q&A section, questions will be answered. During the Q&A, there will be an opportunity for live questions, and we request that you use the Zoom feature to raise your hand for live questions. Please note, for the sake of time, to keep your questions concise. We would like to engage and answer as many questions as possible during the allotted Q&A time. The PowerPoint slides and recording will be sent to all participants. Also, look for the survey link in the chat. It will be available early and later in the webinar. We appreciate you completing that before you leave today. Thank you so much. At this time, I will turn this over to Denise Litz, Chief of the Division of Economic Development.
Swat Eskedahe, greetings everyone. My name is Denise Litz. I'm the Chief for the Division of Economic Development in the Office of Indian Economic Development. Such a pleasure to welcome you all to our first of a three-part series for native language. I'm originally from the Tuscarora Nation, located in Niagara Falls, New York, and I am remotely working from the DMV area in Virginia. Our director is Anna LeBeau. She joins us from Omaha Tribe of Nebraska. And her contact information is there. Next slide, please. So we have two teams in our division. We have economic development specialist team and our grants management team. I'll talk a little bit about what each of them do, just so that you can be familiar with our office. Next slide, please. So our economic development specialists, we have three. Janelle Green is from Citizen Potawatomi Nation. She covers Alaska and the Southwest Zone. You can see the states on that map that she covers. Jim Henry is Maidu and covers the Northwest Zone. You can see the green that's highlighted there. And then Rebecca Horsechief is Osage and Pawnee and covers the Eastern Zone. And you can see those highlighted in blue. Next slide, please. So our grants team oversees all of our grant programs. We have currently 5 grant programs: the Business Incubators, Native American Business Development Institute, Tourism, National Tribal Broadband, and the Living Languages Grant. Dennis Wilson is our grants management specialist. He's from Taos Pueblo. And then Elizabeth Callahan is from Choctaw Nation, and she is our program analyst. We do have an open position that closed on November 3rd for a native language program specialist. We're hoping to build our team so that we have someone with that expertise that will be overseeing our living language grant once we get that awarded here this fall. Next slide, please. So Tribal Tech, our training and technical assistance team, we have Dr. Priscilla Belize, Oneida Nation. Dr. Uulani Kor-Yorkman is the TA coordinator and business development specialist. We have Dr. Kelly LaChance is from Confederated Tribe of Siletz. She's our TA coordinator, native language specialist. And we have Freddie Gipp, who's from Apache Tribe of Oklahoma, TA coordinator and business development specialist. Next slide, please. So now it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Tim DeGay. He is the education program specialist with the Bureau of Indian Education. Tim, go ahead.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Yep.
Yes.
Good. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not sure if it's good morning for some of you, but it's good afternoon for me here and for most of us. What I want to do is just kind of give you a little bit of an overview of what we're trying to accomplish, and then just give you a general sense of the purpose of our meeting here today. I'm a education program specialist. I'm with the Office of the Associate Deputy Director, the BIE Tribal Control Schools. I work with 96 schools, and they're scattered all over the country, and all tribal control schools, meaning that they're contract schools or grant schools. And I cannot possibly visit all 96 schools in a single year. And so what we do is divide it up into thirds. So we average each year visiting about 33 to 35 schools. And my part there is to look at their language programs, see how they're doing, see if they need resources, need help, and need assistance. And so that's my work. And each of these schools, they have their own challenges. And challenges may be anything from certification issues. In some cases, there's the issues of the lack of language teachers. And sometimes some places they resort to their tribal elders to come in and help out. And then there are other issues as well in schools about curriculum and about lesson planning and about trying to get someone at the minimum qualified and willing and able to come to class to teach a language. And and some schools are much more successful. They may have anywhere from 5 to 7 language teachers. And some of these schools will have developed curriculum courses that range from intro level, beginner level, intro level, and intermediate to advanced. And so a lot more is happening at those schools. And so the schools that I visit, they range from one extreme to the other. And so the purpose of why we wanted to come together, I think the seed was planted recently. When we looked at, I look at my schools and I presented some of what I learned about our schools to a larger audience. And that ignited a conversation about, can we do this a little more often, get the word out there? And ultimately it was, how do we create a sense of urgency about our language, about language loss, as we call it. Researchers will call it language shift. And if you speak your language, practice your language, and value your language, it's really about language loss. What is going to happen when our language, if our language disappears? And so that's why we're trying to bring together these webinars to have that conversation. And I know many of you out there are probably saying, no, we're not going to lose our language. And I stand with you on that. We're not going to lose our language if we do something about it. Not tomorrow, today, yesterday. And those are some of the mindset we come into this webinar with, to raise some of that, some of those issues around that, and to get some of the attention, the discussion moving, and a sense of urgency. Let's do something. And so what we are trying to do today is present to you 3 people who have been doing this kind of work in their community. And they're, so you'll hear from them. We raised some questions for them about what drives them to want to do this kind of work. And they face these odds of the challenge is overwhelming, and they face it. They're facing it right in the middle, and they're going right forward, and they're teaching their children, their kids, the language in spite of what was happening in the larger world for all of us. And so we want to present to you and have you hear, at least today, from these 3 people. We prepared some questions for them, and you'll hear them. And after the questions, we will open it up to you, the audience, and and we want to hear about your concern. What sort of questions do you have? Perhaps it's comments that you have about language revitalization, language loss, language shift. So this is the time for you to hear from our people, but it's also a time for you to for us to hear from you about what you're thinking and what you're doing in your community and where your issues are when it comes to language. And so now I will turn it over to back to you, and we will begin and introduce the panel of speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Begay. So at this time, I would like to introduce our esteemed panel speakers. First, we have Dr. Rosa King from the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. Dr. King is the Oneida language immersion educator. We also have Wyman Kirk from the Cherokee Nation. Wyman is the Cherokee Immersion School administrator. And then we also have Whitney Nephew from the Seneca Nation of Indians. Whitney is the Immersed Learning Lead Facilitator. Welcome, and thank you to our panel speakers for being here. So I will go ahead and turn this over to Dr. Rosa King to share with us on her Language Nest program. Dr. King.
Tagalis fagweg, yego sio ni jeje latu igele ji aguahloli ji, gini bugatsano ni ji ganto iswe sen ua, igele aguahloli ji, wat guano heladu ganto niswe sen ua oni, Keli hunyani he ladiksa suha neto agijokwa ne de hadiwa nakwa not ne ungwajit nakwa ji kaylee huni unguho neha jini dwabanodas. So hello everyone, my name is Yego C. That's my Oneida name, otherwise Rosa King. And I am the founder of the Dehadiwanakwa Language Nest. I am also the instructor of the program, and I teach pre-K to grade 1 combined classroom in the Dehadiwanakwa Language Nest. And so I just started by sharing a few words in Oneida about myself and thanking you all for being here today. It's such a great opportunity to be able to share some of this great work we do in the Dehadiwanakwa Language Nest, especially with those across Indian country that are doing the same work. And so hopefully I can share a little bit about this right now and then give you a little bit more insight as we move through the questions. The Dehadiwanakwa Language Nest is a preschool Oneida language immersion program. And this is our 6th year of operation. We use Oneida language as the sole medium of instruction in the program. And we operate using a holistic culture-based curriculum for students. So each month that we move throughout the school year, there is ceremonial and cultural curriculum content that's covered and taught for students. One of the main goals of our program is to create speakers within our children. So we know that ages 0 to 5 is a prime age group for language acquisition. And so we aligned that with the roots and the starting point of our program in serving children of that age, because within our community, our language is in a state of emergency with 2 speakers left of nearly 18,000. So that's about 0.001%. And so that was one of my motivations in founding this program. And so the main goal is to create speakers of our program and provide a place for students to be able to hear our language in our community. There are very, very few spaces that you can hear just Oneida being used. And so we always consider our classroom, our program, a sacred space where our language lives. And so that's a little bit about the program that I work for. I know I have just a little time, and the other panelists, which I'm very grateful to see and be on this webinar with, giving them some opportunity. So I think that's enough. That's all I'll share right now. So Togini, Noah.
Thank you, Dr. King. So now, next is our speaker is Wyman Kirk from the Cherokee Nation Immersion School.
Yo, Nagad, Aduhin Dawadon, Aniki Lohin Digiyanwe, Galielik Jigedo, huh? My name is Wyman Kirk. My Cherokee name is Aduhin, which means I'm a water waiter. I wade in water. And I work here for Cherokee Nation, our immersion school. And our school was started in 2002, and it began with a 3-year-old program. And as those students progressed, we added on a year. So that 3-year-old became a 4-year-old program, eventually kindergarten. For the first few years, it capped at 6th grade once they got to 6th grade. And just like the Oneida school that you just heard about, the language of instruction was all in Cherokee. Now, one of the things that happened with us that I should note is that when we started, and I should say we collectively, I was not working for the school at the time. I was at Northeastern State, but in 2002, well, actually at 2002, I was part of the group that did a survey, and that will relate to one of the other questions before, and was there with the school. And my wife and I, we put our first son through the program as well. So I was a parent for a number of years. And in that initial founding, the school followed really more or less state standards. Now, it was a cultural element, but it wasn't strongly implemented. Since we've came in 2020, we've really tried to implement a more cultural based, and eventually we want to have a cultural base, and then those other academic standards come on to it. We go from, well, a couple of things. We started a baby immersion program. So now we start with 6 weeks old. We also co-opted our 7th and 8th grade class, which had been in English, as a gateway to Sequoia High School, which is our BIE school that most of our students go to, into immersion this fall as well. And so now we have a system going from 6 weeks old to 8th grade. We also have funding to start an immersion track at Sequoia. So we're being really aggressive with what our plans are. We have currently around 124 students in the 3-year-old through 8th grade. And we have 8 students in our baby immersion. We're starting small with them. Our plan is, we just moved into a new facility as well. So a little bit about sort of the underlying idea behind the school is that we're really trying to go well beyond this idea of making these students second language learners. We're recruiting for the school first language families. So we have a number of students, especially in these younger grades, whose parents are in our adult master apprentice program. We have a housing unit that's adjacent to the school that it is called a speaker village. And we're moving in both first language speakers and individuals who have committed to language learning, language families whose kids are coming here to create a larger environment for language learning. So that way our students, they can go, 2nd grade can walk over and sit on the porch with our first language speakers. They can sit around and drink, well, the kids don't drink coffee, but they can drink hot cocoa or something. And they get a chance and opportunity on a regular basis to interact with our first language speakers. We're fortunate, very fortunate in the sense that we have still roughly, I would say, 1,700 speakers left who we have access to. And here adjacent to the school, we have not only our master apprentice program and other speakers, but we have this larger language village that's being created. So what's part of our system that we're creating is a larger language environment for not only the school, but everybody that is involved in these language efforts. So I'll go ahead and stop there, and I'll pass the baton.
Thank you, Wyman. We have our next speaker, Whitney Nephew.
Yeah, oes gen os wagwego, Whitney Nephew ni gia so na gynio o ka da agesano ye ne ongwa oe ka ko ne hanyongwa yo ne hage ni onondawa ga ne nyoin zo da eat ne agya da ne how ne hage kwa squa ne tonani joko ne agesos has ha. So I just shared my greetings with everybody. I'm really humbled to be here, by the way. This is awesome to hear from these other panelists. And so my English name is Whitney Nephew. I don't have a clan name. My father is Seneca Deer Clan, and my enrollment is Seneca Cayuga of Oklahoma. To just give a little bit of professional background, I started in language revitalization about 7 years ago, last month actually. And that was with enlisting in the first adult immersion cohort to take place in Seneca community. I didn't have anything to do with the founding of that adult program. I am simply a product of it and a product of all the work that that founder and the teachers and every elder who has had a hand in our language development. This is kind of, it's a bit of a, culminating moment to see some of the second language learners coming out of it now, and they produce new adult speakers every year. So I was really fortunate to work with an elder who was especially strict, like in the very best way. Anytime that we were in conversation or anywhere, like in her house, I want to call it, because she built this school that we worked in, and she would never allow us even a single English word during our whole workday there. And so that had a big impact on me, and I started to draw on that approach. Of course, just seeing, how quickly language kind of, was received by the adult learners in that space. But I quickly brought that same approach home and leaning on everything that I could say at any time to just keep these words up and kind of as a protective factor against the risk of individual, language regression that is so high. And it's such a fragile state for new learners and even learners, years in. Using all the language that I could at home. Not only did it keep that fulfillment up, that I felt being with our elders and being with language peers at work, but it also, I really believed early on that it would give me one more person to talk to, which was my daughter, who you see here in the picture 3, and she's there in picture 5. So I'm going to reference her quite a bit, actually, probably for the rest of like my career, because just having raised a child who is now fully functionally bilingual, it's changed my perspective of everything that's possible. And it's really broadened my view and guided me toward where I know I need to spend my energy as a second language speaker. And that's in helping support any family who is utilizing language so intensively, many of whom are using language exclusively, Seneca language that is, with their kids, supporting them so that their kids may have all the atmosphere and all the encouragement for their own language to unfold at a bilingual rate. So our current situation in Seneca language today, we do have elders in our community, and they work every day with our second language speakers. And we're really fortunate that they're here. They serve not only as, sometimes even instructors in some cases, like with my cohort, but they're also just, they're helping to polish up how we're saying things so that it's congruent with what they're used to hearing and how they want to hear things. They're also still, our spiritual guides in what everything is meant in the language and how much, weight it holds and everything that needs to be maintained here in our lifetime and moving forward. So we're really lucky that they're here. The Seneca language actually skips at least one generation because our youngest elder right now is in their, they're in their late 70s. And then the bulk of our adult second language speakers are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. So it skips at least one generation in there. And then right now is a time when we're seeing the language return to the children. So it hadn't really been spoken to a functional degree for many generations since our elders were children, really. And now we have children, newborns on up to 7 years old, who are, we know that their language is coming along. I hear language from the kids, amongst the kids. We're in dialogue with the kids in an immersive space every day and the work that we do now. And it's so uplifting and it's so insightful about what it's going to take to really maintain the vitality of Onondawa Gagawano, our Seneca language. And to just move forward as effectively as we possibly can, given the resources that we have, which is not a huge number of speakers. I'm blown away by that 1,700 count down in Cherokee. That's amazing. But we're at about a couple dozen here, among second language learners. And like I say, we've got about more than 5 fluent elders remaining for sure, but we have about 5 fluent elders readily available, and whose language is readily accessible for learners to work with. And so that kind of brings me toward my work today that I'll, hope to just share some more information about. But I founded the OIED-Technical Immerse Learning Nest. We've serviced a total of 11 kids across 8 families. So it's, microscopic, relatively speaking, but it's where we need to be right now, because from my own daughter's progression and her development and how her language unfolded here at home before any program like this existed, that's always been a guiding force in making sure that what we do as far as how we approach the work and the atmosphere, we very strictly keep an immersion for the kids. It's been a total guiding force because we know what it can add up to if we get to these kids as young as we can. And we start at about a year old, mostly for mobility sake. And we try to keep the kids, pretty active during the day. So we're a staff of 2. We have 4 full-time kids and 1 circling back because she's a speaker. And then from there, our aim is to keep them up through, their pre-K years until school is compulsory, and have other programs to send them to.
Wonderful. Thank you, Whitney. Thank you. And thank you to our panel speakers. So at this time, Dr. Begay will be moderating the 3 questions to ask our panel speakers.
Hello again, or as we say in my language, ya'at ati ya'at. It's still good. So anyway, still good. Hello, everyone. We created some questions for our panelists, and what we will do now is to move into that, and I will ask the questions, and the panelists will have time to respond, and we'll go in the same order that we just went, and we'll continue that through the 3 rounds. We have 3 questions for you. So the first question is, how did you initially identify the need for native language revitalization and immersion programs in your community? And what motivated you to take action? We'll start with Dr. King.
Yeah, so this is a really good question, actually, because it really touches on the roots and the motivations, I guess, of some of the work that I've done. So like I shared earlier, we have been aware of how many speakers we have remaining in our community, and it's very, very minimal compared to our larger community and our larger population of give or take 18,000 Oneida members, and that doesn't include descendants or those that are adopted. So the number is even larger. But really, it really comes down to is the number of speakers that we have remaining in this community here in Wisconsin, in Oneida. And so that was a really eye-opening reality for us in further pursuing immersion education in this community. And so another reason that really helped us identify why we needed to really pursue immersion in this community was there's no spaces where our language is spoken either. We don't have the speakers, we do not have the spaces. And so one thing, especially about language work, is it's all very action oriented, and it is very reflective of our language, which is also action oriented. And so we knew we had to do something to be able to address that critical need in our community to increase proficiency in second language learners or adults, and also build and create speakers within our children. And so one way in doing that was creating this program that I work for, the Dehadu Language Nest. And so we actually address both of those needs in this program. So we train teachers and build their proficiency as second language learners, and also teach them immersion techniques to use in the classroom that helps assist their speakership, and then also create speakers through the program. And so that is essentially what we've done in terms of addressing that need of having so few speakers in our community. And that's just, it speaks to the larger shared history that a lot of communities and where they're at now with very few speakers. One thing that I just wanted to say is that motivation, language is our identity, and it's also central to our collective sovereignty. If we don't have our language, we cease to exist as a people now and into the future. So when we think about the effects that language loss has, it's not only individual in who we know ourselves to be in terms of our identity, but really collectively in not being able to continue our sovereignty now and into the future for our communities. So there's a lot of impacts that language loss has. For me, my personal motivation has always been my personal philosophy and belief through learning my language and starting to learn my language as an adult 10 years ago was that when I started doing that, I realized how powerful our language is and that it's a medicine. And so my personal belief is that our language is a medicine. That medicine can be used in our community to address a lot of the social needs that affect and impact our communities. And so that's one of my personal motivations for doing this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those personal, really very personal kind of words. Okay, the next person, Wyman.
So yeah, it's a really interesting question. Originally, I made reference to the survey that was done in 2002. So I was working for Cherokee Nation at the time, and we received money from A&A to do a survey, and it was one of the required elements of getting additional funding. And in that survey, we asked 3 general questions. Question 1, or we had 3 goals to the survey. One goal was to determine if people cared about language at all, just the general awareness that our Cherokee population had regarding language. Second was to try to come up with an assessment of the status of the language. Anecdotally, we'd heard for years, we knew that the language was being lost, but we'd never done any sort of work on a quantitative basis to kind of make that actual determination. And the third thing was to say that if our language is being lost, if there were issues in terms of language loss, what did Cherokee people want to do about it? Now, a quick note on my background, I come from a community that's about 25 miles south of here called Marble City. My mom's side, they all speak Cherokee. My dad's side, obviously not, but on my mom's side, they're all speakers. And I grew up around the language. I myself, apparently I spoke until I was 6 or 7 years old and moved around and then lost it and then started trying to relearn it when I got older. And so it took on a personal thing for me because I was seeing a lot of the information that we found in this 2002 survey, which namely was that our language was being lost. We were seeing a dramatic decline. We were seeing that the speakers we had at that time, again, this was 2002, that our youngest speakers were in their upper 30s, lower 40s in terms of our youngest speakers. And then, of course, we still had our speakers in the 50s and whatnot, 60s, but we didn't have a lot of speakers in those lower age ranges. We didn't have speakers that we could find in their 20s and their teens and whatnot. Certainly didn't find any who were younger than that. Now, there may have been a couple out there at the time, but in general, we had dramatic language loss going across our communities, which I'm sure everybody can identify with. And so when we had that information and we asked people what they wanted to do about it, the overwhelming majority of people said that we needed to focus on children. And that's where the birth of the immersion school came in, that we needed to focus our efforts, initiatives in terms of language on those children, starting with a 3-year-old program. Now, in terms of the motivation, I mean, it was related to this idea that we were losing language. Now, that plan had a lot of other ideas that ultimately never got implemented. And so that's one of the regrets I have, that we never really drove that plan all the way through. The real only 2 elements that came from that were the implementation of the immersion school, starting with 3-year-old, and then starting a program at Northeastern State University for Cherokee education to create certified teachers for that program. So for our program here and our roots and where we came from, a lot of it stemmed to that 2002 survey. There were other things that happened along the way, and there were a couple of years ago, probably the most significant thing was a recognition that we really needed to have a really actual sense of how many speakers we had. There were issues with our 2002 survey because Oklahoma was going through a change into 911 addresses. half of our, or 3/4 of the people who we reached out to, we had bad addresses. And so we actually had to change the design of our survey. So we really didn't have a sense of how many speakers we had left. It was really just a ballpark guess. Back in 2017, Howard Payton, who's our executive director in language now, a real strong language advocate, and we wouldn't be here if it weren't for him. What they decided to do is they said, let's see how many speakers we have. And they started this idea of a speaker's book. And in the speaker's book, they just basically had this really expensive archival, it's supposed to last 10,000 years book. And they went community to community and had community members, speakers, identify themselves and other speakers. So people signed the book when other people said, yeah, he's a speaker, she's a speaker, they're a speaker. And they signed this book. And it became this gigantic wave where all these speakers had to sign the book. When all was said and done, we had roughly a little over 2,000 people. And so that really was one of the other things that motivated people when they saw, you know, that number. And I know that that's a lot, but relatively speaking, not too long ago, that number was like 10,000, 15,000 and whatnot. So when speakers saw that we were really losing the language, that was a turning point, certainly in terms of motivation.
Wow, that's great. Immersion schools. That's great. Okay. Next, Whitney.
Hi. So I wanted to just reflect on, again, I didn't have a role in initiating any of the adult learning process, but when I was in my program and before any, immersive programming existed for young kids, as we have now with the Nest, one of the biggest turning points for me was hearing my own daughter's language unfold, and trying to, I was really meticulous about like what language I was hearing from her. And I wrote down every time that she spoke like a new Seneca word for the first time, I kept a spreadsheet and I wrote that word down, and I would have Post-its in my pocket, and notes on my phone. And by the end of every day, I had to tally all those up and I added them to the list. And it was only if it was something, unprompted, I was really keeping an ear out for like what language is coming from her that I'm not telling her to say. She's just now pinning it to this new experience, and coming out with these words. And that list just kept growing and growing. And it really exploded when she hit 2 years old. And then I want to say that further into that second year of hers, like, I was even hearing some like, just kind of like language, quirks, like we would hear with kids, in their English development, like where she wasn't saying her W's, following G's, for example. So like gagwego was like gagego, that kind of thing. And I remember going to work one day and wanting to just chat about this with our elder there, because she's got kids and she's got grandkids and she's worked as a teacher for so many years. And I asked her, I was like, what did the language sound like? Trying to stay in language, of course, with all this, but what did the language sound like? When you would hear kids speak, and I was like, really, I don't know. It was such a shock to me when her response was that she'd never heard a child speak before. And so I was, almost 2 years into my learning at that point, because my daughter was born that first year that I started learning professionally. And so I was just like really blown away by that. And it really kind of occurred to me that like, this is like what's happening here is such a rare thing. And it took, some time after that even to just really contemplate like how many households we have here across Seneca communities, and all the residential, territories here in Western New York, where we have a conversational speaker in home. And we have young children, in many cases, pre-verbal children, but it hasn't added up to the same outcome of a child speaking bilingually, so maybe the language is being, like used in less than like immersive, degrees, or maybe it's I got really meticulous sometimes, just like tracking how much time I had with my daughter, like by the week's end, because I was working full time and commuting 2 extra hours on top of that. But I also, really made a point to like step back from all other family and make sure, like, carve out time when it was just me and her together, and make sure that, there wasn't, English, I hate to call them distractions, right? Because it's her dad sitting there on the couch, but just that type of like recollection that, I think we really need to set exclusive time and settings, even, so that code switching process that took about like 2 full years to really solidify, and for her to like rely on the language that she has in all of our communication without needing, any insistence or any reminders about what's our language and how we speak to each other and anything. It was a really long process. And so having seen like how rarely that, that was maybe fleshing out across other households. And it did, I think for me, it was a tough thing. It's tough for everybody who comes into language learning as adults, because if you're, as soon as you're working full time, right, you have so much less energy and attention to put toward your own family's needs. And I think before we had initiatives like the Nest, there just wasn't concern for what these professional learners might need on a personal basis, what might be needed, within their households, or to better support their children. Because again, even when I started using language so intensively with my daughter, it wasn't to build her up as a speaker. I didn't necessarily believe that was possible. It was just to keep me going, speaking, and having somebody to talk to. So this whole shift had to happen, even just in my perspective, that this is in fact possible. It needs a lot of support, tons of consistency, and we can't miss these early pre-verbal, years and months. We have to just like keep at it. And over time, like even in the 3 years that we've had our Nest running, I've had even more to kind of reflect on, in that we want to hold on to our kids in that space until they're securely code switching, and until they no longer need any prompts, right? And so I think we can still get that done, before they hit school age. And that's what we're aiming to do with our oldest full-time kids in there right now. But yeah, and just the my own sense of how much more secure the language was with my daughter. So even like at my prime, right, I was like a great, stellar student in like an immersive adult learning setting. But as soon as my daughter's language unfolded, she still had the wherewithal, right, and just better capacity in the language to keep me corrected, and remind me of words. And so like for me, that said it all. Like the language is safer with our kids, and we need to make sure that it's held in that very youngest generation, because it can't be just up to us as adults.
Wow. It's great when the child that you're teaching suddenly becomes your teacher. Very interesting. So, okay, next question is, our next question here is, wow, some really great information here we're hearing. What strategies or initiatives have you implemented to create a sense of urgency within your community to preserve and revitalize the native language? Here, the emphasis is the creating a sense of urgency. Okay. Go ahead.
So for this question, within our community, the main initiative that we implemented was our immersion program. That was our language nest that we currently have. And so that was really the catalyst in addressing this need of not having many speakers available and providing a solution in creating speakers in future generations. and doing that with children because they're in a prime age of language acquisition. They are able to pick up a language very naturally and fluidly, whether that be their first language or second language from ages 0 to 3 and also 0 to 5, expanding that a little bit more. And so within our program at Dehadiwanakwa, we have 4 main components that comprise our program. The first one is our language nest, creating speakership and speakers within our students. The second is teacher training, which is also a really important need because we can't have our program if we don't have teachers. So those 2 things somewhat go hand in hand. They are really important areas that are tied together in terms of language preservation, revitalization, in supporting immersion in our community. The third area of our program is community outreach. So I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But the fourth area is curriculum development. And so those last 2 areas, community outreach and curriculum development, have really been a strategy and another initiative that we've used in our immersion school to educate our community on what immersion is, what is the state of the Oneida language in this community, and also what are the benefits of immersion, what are the benefits of bilingualism, what are the benefits of a student learning their ancestral language. And so we've used and researched a lot of important studies that have been done on native language immersion, language revitalization, and we actually just recently compiled a community outreach series on our Facebook page that we distributed. We did one a day. We did a post of a frequently asked question about immersion. We did a post about facts and research based information that we put out to our community to educate them. The other area that we do is curriculum development. And what we do is we create a lot of resources that we put on our YouTube page for the community to use. And so within language preservation, revitalization, there's a lot of different roles. And so immersion is one very focused area of language revitalization. And then there's also language acquisition, second language acquisition. And so one way we try to kind of bridge or connect all those areas with our program is through those other outreach areas, community outreach, curriculum development. So like I mentioned, we have a YouTube channel where we put a lot of language lessons on there for parents of our program, but also community members. We put language lessons on there. We created a number of books and videos that we distribute on our Facebook page and to the community, as well as a lot of other resources. And so what that does is educates the community again on the state of our language, but it also gives them the resources to begin to individually address that in distributing curriculums and books so that they can also learn language in the home. So when you work in this field, it's there's a lot of different needs, I guess, that you are addressing at the same exact time. And so it is it's really rewarding, I would say, in a sense, because when you're able to share what you do with people, they get an understanding of what you do. And when you have that shared understanding, it builds those connections and relationships, especially in our community. And we can all now have a shared understanding of where our language is at and create shared support for our programming. So that's kind of the main overview of what we've done, is really creating that immersion program here to address the speakers that we have remaining and creating more speakers within our children. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And as we noticed, we're running short on time, so we'll continue, and I'll stop from interrupting you. Go ahead with question 2.
Okay, yeah. And I can make mine relatively short. I mean, I think, to be honest, you know, not making this political, but the most significant thing that happened in terms of the sense of urgency and pushing things forward was Cherokee people elected an administration, our chief and deputy chief, ran on a platform of language. They said, you know, you elect us and we will drive language. And so when they won, they started the Department of Cherokee Language, which did not exist before 2020. And they put language people in those positions, and decisions from the top down are based on language preservation, cultural preservation, making decisions based on language. I don't know if that worked for other tribes, but certainly when you don't have to have battles or fights with, your political leaders or those folks on any of those levels, that everybody's saying, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and we're in agreement, it makes a lot of it a lot easier. So the issues we have are not related to that. And then on the community level, our speakers have recognized for the first time in a very long time that their experience and their knowledge is being prioritized. And so that, at least for us, has been the real sort of strategy or initiative that's pushed things along, both within the community and on a tribal level, even within and without the Cherokee Nation.
Thank you, Wyman. It always is political. So, okay.
Yeah.
Whitney?
So yeah, just to talk a little bit about my sense of that as far as what strategies, to promote the urgency. Fortunately, I think among the Seneca Nation, there's always been, as long as I can remember, there's always been very vocal support, politically for language initiatives and departments. And there's a lot of money, spent every single budget year, to the count of like $5 million toward language revitalization efforts. And so part of our obstacle was creating urgency in this type of work to exist also, like amidst these other departments and whatnot. So it's been a lot of like advocacy. I'll admit far less so at the community level, because there is need and demand all across the community for language access. But it's on a different degree, that maybe households are looking for the most part. And so to just create the urgency of how we need to kind of double down on our investments in these cases where we have a conversational speaker in home, right? And we know the capacity that they have to bring along one of their children or all of their children, right? Or children that they will have. Maybe they don't even have their family yet. But where we were really looking to advocate among, our political realm here and just raise awareness about what's at stake with, that return on investment. If we can, put our funding and our attention toward the kids, like that could save us from having to pay adult learners to go through adult immersion, like 2 decades from now, right? And so like sometimes those kinds of, that kind of thinking, was helpful. And really it was about like pushing, I guess, like in that political realm, being the advocate for what we knew we needed the program to look like. We're not teaching the kids in our program. We're providing an atmosphere where they can naturally acquire Seneca language again. And so that requires a lot more adults than say a classroom would. And so even though in our childcare facility where we're hosted now, we're in an unlicensed room. And so like per licensing, we would just need to have 1 adult per 4 toddlers. But we really prefer, and we're going to remain at this ratio of 2 to 1, because that seems to be the sweet spot, especially once kids' language starts emerging and they don't have the, capacity to, pick and choose just Onondaga or just English, language is going to emerge first, or in which setting, like they're going to speak what they speak. And that skill of code switching will come over time, based on who they're with and where they are and what the norms are that they've been raised into. So like being like really stubborn on what our ratios are, because we're looking for those naturally bilingual speakers, to come out of this, and being insistent that it be an immersed space and that we don't have too much, overlap between like being dependent on English speaking staff to come through, or, having separate, sometimes separate amenities in some cases, so that we're not having that English trickle into this space where we've worked so hard to keep it out of our classroom. And then even coming down to like our hires, being really strict on our hires must be highly conversational, because that's what an acquiring child's language development requires. You know, they need to be around like very advanced language and as sophisticated as we can get it, you know, and that's what's going to add up to something that they can actually function off of once they start acquiring that level of language. So it was really about, for us, create an urgency around this type of work existing and needing some of those language resources that were already in the community and being spent each year to come and focus on this age level. And again, reinvesting in those families where there's a good amount of language there in the household. And it's a tough thing because, you know, there's a huge discrepancy between households who have language and households who don't have any sometimes, you know, in our communities. But in the case of language vitality, like this is just such an important step for us to not overlook this youngest generation.
Thank you, Whitney. In the interest of time, I know we have one more question, the last question here, and we'd also like to have time at the end for question and answers from the audience. So let me just ask the last question here, and if you can give as brief of a response as you can, we appreciate it. And then we open it up to questions from the audience. Question number 3: what are the main challenges you've encountered in promoting native language immersion? And can you share successful examples where your efforts led to positive outcomes in your community? If you can limit your response, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so the main 3 challenges, I would say, it kind of piggybacks off of what we've just been talking about in the last question, is advocacy, funding, and community support for our program. When we talk about politics, really what my personal belief is keeping politics out of language. We know that we need to ensure that this language survives into the future, and we need to focus strictly on that and put everything else aside. It's really challenging sometimes in organizations when it's money and politics that come into play, but really there should never be a question about money or politics when we're talking about language and culture. We have a shared understanding about the importance of those things. And so those are kind of some of the main challenges that I would say, at least from my personal and community perspective on implementing Oneida language immersion in this community, is really, it comes down to that advocacy, funding, and support. And so just a successful example of trying to address that is having conversations with people that make decisions, having conversations with administrators, building conversations and providing outreach advocacy in the community, educating the community on benefits of language learning, language revitalization, language immersion, educating community and stakeholders of the program and the community on what the state of the language is at. And so making our decisions based on that reality is really important, because one of our personal cultural philosophies here in Oneida is understanding that we make decisions for the next 7 generations. So it's our generation right now that's making decisions for our children. And so we really need to be very, very mindful of that, but also be very critical of what we're doing in our programs. Like Whitney had shared, understanding that we're very, very strict about training teachers and who we're hiring, and also making sure that they're a right fit for the program. Also making sure that we have proper ratios, because we're really about quality, not necessarily quantity in our programs, because language is all about quality education. And so that's kind of what we've encountered here in the Dehadiwanakwa language nest. So thank you.
Thank you.
Amen to all that. I agree with that. I would say, and it's been one of the issues, and I know anybody who's done language immersion efforts can speak to this: English, and not just in terms of its pervasiveness in the classroom and seeping in. Here we have this kind of subversive mentality. So you'll get people in and they'll say, well, I want my kid to learn Cherokee, but they have to learn English. I need my kid to know this stuff on, culture, but they must know English. And so English becomes the standard, the bar. Yeah, Cherokee, cute. Yeah, it's pretty, enjoy it. But when it comes down to it, man, they got to know English. And if that is the mentality that people have, your languages will never be there. So no, English, no. And I'm not against English. I'm not against it. I was an English major at NSU. I read to my kids after we read Cherokee, Emily Dickinson and T.S. Eliot and Shakespeare. I love this stuff. But when it came to language, it's got to be Cherokee. It's got to be Cherokee and more Cherokee. They say, what about English? What about it? We're doing Cherokee here. And in terms of successful examples, what happens is when you can get those parents on board and they understand, as kind of maybe counterintuitive as it sounds, the better you do your language, actually the better they'll do in English, then you can win them over. So when we say, hey, it may not make sense right now, but the more we do Cherokee and the better we do Cherokee, the better their English will be down the road, because those skills will transfer. So if we do our English literacy great, their English literacy will also be great. You don't have to worry about the English. So this pervasiveness of English, to me, that is the number one issue that has to be fought, both in terms of its presence, because they want to speak it, but also because of this underlying attitude that we have to fight, this colonial concept that our languages are secondary to this idea of English.
Oh, thank you. Whitney?
Oh, that was great, Wyman. Yeah. So the challenge that I really wanted to focus in on, just being short on time, it comes from a different angle, but just the issue of burnout. And in a community like ours, where we have so few speakers to draw on for all of the language work that exists and, is on our shoulders, I've seen firsthand, I felt firsthand, and I've seen, among friends, colleagues, and nobody is, immune to it, this risk of individual burnout if we overload them and if we don't look out for them as best as we possibly can. I think that in our program, it's something that I'm really trying to approach, just, being at the head of design and our scheduling and looking at what is possible, that we can afford these families. We want to do everything we can for the kids, but we need to look out for ourselves first. And I try to keep in mind just this kind of thinking that rather than bracing for burnout among our teaching staff and our speakership, why don't we protect against it? And so with our program, it's funny, as soon as I talk to other educators who work in early childhood, and they might be in English speaking settings, right? And so they're not having to polish up their English speech, as well as doing all the other planning that they do, in a week's time or a day's time. But, if they hear our hours of our program, they're blown away, thinking of these toddlers, whoa, that's a long day, 8 to 3:45, that's a really long day. Right. And from, this other societal norm of parents work 40 hours a week, there's always this pressure of, why can't you keep the kids till 5, right? And why can't you stagger your two staff and keep the kids somehow longer into the evening? And to me, it gets kind of comical because no, that will burn us out so quickly. And if we don't look out for our staff, we're going to be able to do this work for such a short time before we've just burned through everybody working for us and have nobody to rely on anymore. So for us, we're really strict on and just try to raise that awareness that no, the hours of our children's programming is always going to be shorter than our staff's workday, number one, so that teachers have a chance to debrief together in English, right? Because as much as I hate the English too, Wyman, among us teachers, right? And any of our admin, as soon as any of our admin have to be involved in a conversation, it has to happen in English. And we can't have the kids around for times like that. But it's that time for debriefing and planning for the next day. It's going to make every day of this work, smoother and smoother. We need continued training time just to work on the language aspects, right? And while we have elders right now, we need time with those elders. And so that's something that we try to be as flexible, and open-minded about, like, how we can make that work. Anytime kids are absent or illness arises, like, one of us is, heading over to the elders just to make sure that we're getting all the time with them we possibly can. And we come up with a lot of questions, by the way. I think that people working in childcare and bringing kids along and having to carry a lot of times more than half of that dialogue going on in there, it's the best thing for, figuring out what you can't say. Just as an aside, but also thinking about our professional development schedule, like, there's a lot that we've had to pick and choose between. Like, we don't necessarily want to follow a school schedule, nor do we need to, because our ceremonies are at opposite times of the year, our major ceremonies here. But we also would never want our kids, for example, to take like a summer break, and then have that risk of regressing, because then they're going to like English care, for any major times, any lengthy times, I guess I would say. But we do, for the sake of teacher respite and just kind of revitalizing the program itself, figuring out what our next stories and new songs are going to be, because we make all that ourselves. These media, and resources don't just exist and we pick and choose as like English teachers can, but we need time to do all that. And so it's a lot on our teachers and our speakers' plate. So looking out for them as best as we can and making sure that we're not burning through staff is so important. Otherwise, no matter how great, and how much community support you have, like, nothing will last that long if you don't look out for staff.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Wyman. Thank you, Dr. King. Thank you, Whitney. Wow. We want to continue this conversation with you for sure. But right now, what we want to do is we don't have a lot of time remaining, about 15 minutes now. Open it up to questions. Kelly, are there any questions you have that we can start with?
Yes, Dr. Begay, we do have some great questions here. So the first question is for Mr. Kirk. What state certifications do your immersion teachers have / require?
So we do require our teachers to be state certified. So they are certified as a teacher in the state of Oklahoma, like any teacher would be if they were teaching like in the public school, say math, science, or anything else. We're a little bit more flexible. They can get there is a degree, education degree to get in Cherokee. And with that certification, they're able to teach here and teach other subject areas. But it's the same as any other public school, which is a challenge because to be honest, not all of our classes have a state certified teacher. The way that we're allowed to operate, depending on the level of the teacher, we can double up. So one teacher has certification that might cover 2 classrooms. And so at present, we have enough to cover those. And we're in the process, we're getting some of our younger folks certified who are going through Master Apprentice. We started a group of certified teachers to go through the Master Apprentice program, adult program. They're graduating in the fall, so we're going to get 5 certified teachers from that group to plug into the classroom. I will say we do have to retrain them because there are elements of the public classroom that we're going to work out of them that they have.
Okay.
Wonderful, thank you. So we have another question, which is open to any panelist who would like to answer it. And it is, has there been an increase in your ceremonies since you have increased the amount of language speakers?
That's a good question. Who wants to tackle that first?
I would, I'll just comment on that. I think that there is a much wider participation in portions of ceremony where people can give individual thanks and participate on an individual basis. We see, there's kind of a direct correlation between those who are studying language and those who are then going to be prepared to carry out, those practices in those ceremonial settings, definitely.
I would say certainly for us. So it's interesting what we have with the majority of our speaking population, a vast majority of them, probably 80%, are Christian. Now, the version of Christianity they practice is a little different than what you would find if you went to a non-Cherokee church, but it is Christianity. And then we do have a number of folks, that other 20% that goes to ceremonial grounds and participates. So on the Christian end, we really haven't seen an increase there. But what's interesting, we have seen a slow rise in terms of individuals, these language learners, these language families who are starting to participate in terms of the traditional ceremonials that are out there. It's noticeable, but it's still a small number, but we are seeing that change. We've talked about it. I don't know necessarily what it means or if it means a lot, but we do have a lot of people who were disconnected from the ceremonial practices after statehood, and that continued to grow. And then now with the immersion schools, with these people having their kids in, we're seeing them sort of gravitate to these options. And we have seen a few, but not many, go to the Cherokee churches, but a majority of them have started going back to some of the ceremonial grounds.
I can just briefly add here. Yeah, in our community, there is, I guess, increased engagement in ceremonial and cultural doings with a lot of people that work in language, work with language in our community. So there definitely is a connection between the two. I think as we continue to grow our language, that we're going to continue to grow the engagement that we see within our ceremonies and participation in our ceremonies as our language continues to grow. So I think that really speaks to this, I guess, indirect benefit or indirect outcome of language learning, is that it really impacts the community positively in increasing engagement, increasing participation.
Wonderful. I have another question. This one comes from their community, which is heavily focused on visibility of the language and creating spaces to share the language. It says our Menominee language is well documented, but the full language is barely spoken anymore, and is only taught at a very basic level. My concern is that it won't be able to develop a new generation of native speakers without training enough adult speakers to a level of fluency. Can you speak to the dynamic between the need for advanced language learning and how that ties into providing immersion for a new generation of first language learners?
Yeah, I could start with that one. I touched on this a little bit in my, I think it was in question 2, that those two things are directly tied to each other. Working with training advanced proficiency in second language learners or in adults, specifically teachers of immersion programs. Really, that's really the root. Sometimes we think about it, yes, we really need to address speakership proficiency in our children. And if we think about that, who's going to provide that? So it kind of makes us take a step back and also having to address a secondary need, but really it's a primary need in training teachers. And so for our program, we do those two things simultaneously. What we try to do when we have summers is be able to use that time period to train teachers since we don't have children. So it's very much a balance because it is challenging not having kids have only Oneida exposure for a gap in that Oneida exposure. And so obviously they would just be hearing English in this summer, but it's a balance in having to train our teachers at that time. And so at some point, hopefully in our community, we can build enough capacity where we don't have to do that anymore, and that we have more teachers, more support, more funding in being able to provide those opportunities for our students in our community. So it really is critical being able to have opportunities for second language advancement and advanced proficiency. So I think that's as much as I'll share. Thank you.
Whitney or Wyman, want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, just to look at our situation here that I can speak to is we typically have people who are going to be our second language speakers move through a full 2 years of adult immersion instruction. And that's inclusive of like an elder, apprenticeship type work throughout those 2 years. And I would really advocate that, yeah, if you know that somebody's going to be needing to work with kids, ages definitely 3 and up, they need to be at an advanced level, and we can't count on that. We can't count on too much more like language progression among our adults to occur in like a natural acquisition setting. I will just say that because we're that much less apt to acquire language than the kids are. So I would advise like not to hire too much lower proficiency than is going to be needed for those whatever ages or grade levels, because you can only really I think the training that my co-lead and I have access to, it's really about polishing up, and working in some new more rare verbs, or sometimes like phrasing things closer to how elders would say, those kind of like nuanced responses, like gathering those up. But you don't have a lot of time once a program's underway. There's not a whole lot of time, right? Unless like how Yagonsi was saying, like unless you take a big pause, right, for teacher training, which is possible. But you got to work on your adult language speakers first, for sure.
And yeah, I'll just say, absolutely right. And both what Dr. King and Whitney have said is certainly true. And it's true for our case that it's a critical part of what we have is that we know our first language speakers are, the average age is 72 years old. We're not sure how long we're going to have them in terms of being in the classroom. We have some younger ones, of course, in the classroom. But building those second language users and speakers up to a point where they can, proficiency wise, are high enough that they can be in the classroom and work and whatnot, is a critical component. We couldn't do one without the other. And again, so for our Master Apprentice program, I think it's probably our best, highest functioning program that we have at Cherokee Nation. We're getting individuals to advanced levels of proficiency. Not all of them, that's kind of the ceiling, not necessarily the floor. We get at least a couple every year, 3 or 4 who are hitting that advanced level. And those individuals are critical to the success of our school and other programs, because without those learners coming in and continuing and being involved, we won't have a program much longer, so it's a clear part. We'd like to have in the classroom a first language speaker and an advanced learner, both working cooperatively in the classroom. And that's the ideal system for how it works. And that's something we'll have opportunity to do for a little while longer, but not for too many more years.
Thank you. Question, Kelly?
Yes. With the development of materials, there's several questions on this. The challenges communities are facing is basically just starting from scratch and creating their own curriculum, their own language programs. And what have our panelists done that may be helpful to our audience here, with any tips on how to address those barriers and those challenges in recreating their materials? And if there's anything that has worked, such as apps, books, or podcasts.
I could share a little bit. That's definitely one challenge in doing this work is having to create all the curriculum and materials that you use in the classroom. Like the other panelists have shared, there's no Oneida language curriculum book out there that we can use in immersion. We have to create everything for ourselves. So that's very different than a mainstream school because they have curriculums in English that they can use for math, science, and every other subject. And so one thing that we've tried to do in the Nest here is to really adapt our resources to be responsive to what students like, what their interests are. And so this is kind of a newer approach to our curriculum development here is creating videos. And sometimes what we'll do is we'll find animation or cartoons and try to create or recreate videos based on that for students. Another thing that we do is we try to incorporate their interests. So I don't know too much about like children's shows or anything like that. The students will, they teach me about that stuff. But what we try to do is, I know what the last year it was like Paw Patrol. And so what we try to do is try to incorporate that, and we'll translate those things in Oneida and incorporate that into their learning in the classroom. And at least for us, we've seen some more engagement by students because it's making the language more adapted to their lives, if we think about it. And what we're really trying to do is bring the language forward into the future. And so that means that we need to create a lot of technological resources on YouTube, on Facebook, on TikTok, all these other things. And it's not the sole thing that helps us, but it's one way that we try to develop resources. What our program does is we actually also contract a number of individuals to create those resources for us. And so what I do in the classroom is I work with those people in knowing what the needs are of those resources, working with them and having them create them for us. So everyone has a little bit of a different role in the program. Some might be trainees in learning, some might be the teachers in the classroom, some might be the curriculum developers. And that's kind of been one way we've tried to do that here in Oneida.
Thank you, Dr. T.
I'm going to go ahead and interrupt. We've met our time. I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm sure there's lots of time that we could spend to continue our discussion. I just want to thank everyone for joining us, especially thanking our presenters. This was a wonderful conversation. We're so thankful for that and very much looking forward to the continuation of our native language series. Kelly or Priscilla, do you guys have anything that you need to add before we close out our meeting?
Yes, I would like to thank everyone for attending today. And please use the information on the slide, which has information about OIED's Division of Economic Development. And also the second link includes information about the Bureau of Indian Education. And as a reminder, please complete your survey as you leave. And thank you again, everyone. And you have a beautiful and blessed day. Thank you for attending.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.